All right, friends. So we started a while ago with talks on the fundamental teachings of the Buddha, with the idea being, it had occurred to me, which was why I started this series, we really don't need much. It's surprising how little we need in terms of unique teachings or different ways for it to be said for us to have everything we need. And so we've talked about a couple of different aspects of the Buddha's basic teachings. Last time I did a talk, we talked about the Eightfold Path, and that's a big topic, and it can be looked at in a number of different ways. So I wanted to revisit the Eightfold Path tonight, specifically looking a little more deeply at wisdom. And what do we mean by wisdom, and how does it manifest in our lives? So just to refresh you on the Eightfold Path, or if you're not as familiar with it, what is it we're talking about? So the Buddha's basic teachings were the Four Noble Truths. In the first teaching, he said that there is this inherent stressful quality to this life that we live. The second is that the nature of that stress is our relationship to the world we live in, that we identify with the world and we grab at the world or push it away, and that's the root of that stress. And then the third noble truth, he says, it doesn't have to be that way. It is possible in this very life to move beyond that way of relating to life. And the fourth of the noble truths is the Eightfold Path, which is the Buddhist prescription for how to achieve that. What is it? What are the things that we do in very practical terms to allow us to free ourselves from this stress and suffering that's inherent in this conditioned life? And then within the Eightfold Path, so there's eight, I call them folds because a lot of times they're referred to as steps, but they're not steps. They're ways of being in the world more than they are steps that you take. So I'll call them folds. So they're divided into three parts. The first part, and that we'll talk most about tonight, is the wisdom part of the Eightfold Path, and it consists of two of these folds. The first is right understanding, and the second is right intention. And in the way the Buddha talked about wisdom, it's a visceral, deep understanding of something, of knowledge, and then acting from that. And so the Buddha talked about our actions as coming from our intentions, and our intentions then being part of that wisdom path. So we have this visceral knowledge of the way things are, and then our intentionality arises from that, which then feeds the other parts of the path. And so the other parts of the path, if you envision it sort of as a circle with wisdom here, there's three folds of the path that are what we do with our mind. How do we spend our mind? And the other three are how do we spend our body? How do we manage our body from a perspective of wisdom? So we can think of this wisdom part of the path, the first two pieces, as feeding the mind piece, which is concentration practice, mindfulness practice, and effort. How much effort do we apply to this? So that's what we're doing with our mind, right? How we're spending our mind. Cultivating the capacity to be present. Then when you are able to be present, what do you do with that mind? What are you present to? And the energy to balance those two. So that's what we do with our mind. Then on the other part of the other three folds, the remaining three folds are what do we do with our life? How do we live from this? And there's three elements of that. The first is action. How do we act in the world that's skillful? Speech. How do we conduct speech, both external and internal, that's skillful? And then right livelihood, so that the things we're doing in the world every day are contributing to the world and not drawing away from the world. So you can see, and we talked about this last time, when you begin to look at the way we spend our mind and the way we spend our body, this wisdom element is really important because it's sort of the energy base that causes us to live in a certain kind of way. So what I want to do is explore what is this wisdom that we're talking about, and how does it work? How does it manifest in a way that allows us to live this peaceful, skillful life and lead to freedom from suffering? So I thought one of the ways to do that would be to look at what wisdom is not. In other words, what's the other side? If there's not wisdom, what's there? And so you could kind of think of the opposite of wisdom. The words that come to mind for me are folly or foolishness, and the one that resonates the most for me is chaos. So when you have wisdom on one side, if you don't have that, then you've got these other conditions in your life that are chaotic, and so if we begin to look at how those two pieces are and compare those a little bit, there's two metaphors that came to mind for me that sort of spoke to what it is that I'm my own experience with it and what I think the Buddha was pointing to. The first is to compare wisdom to being on solid ground, and not wisdom or chaos as being floating on the waves in the middle of the ocean, going up and down with the waves in the middle of the ocean. So you can kind of see, if you look at those two, that idea of being on solid ground, that sense of stability and some of the qualities that come with that, and how we might be and live in that space versus if we were continually going up and down, grasping for air, reaching around, trying to find something solid, how that might be different. The other metaphor that arose for me to compare and contrast the wisdom and the chaos is the idea of, if you imagine that there's a horizon with a mountain or a sea or something that you want to move towards. Wisdom would be being in that environment on a beautiful, clear day. And chaos would be being in a complete fog or in the darkness. So you can begin to see, if you just think of those two metaphors, what are the kinds of qualities that are present in wisdom that are missing in this chaos? And one of the first ones is the view, how much view we have, how much perspective we can take on. With wisdom, it's a big perspective. It's a big, broad perspective. We can see far out from this current moment and this current time. One of the things about seeing that way, it's not only seeing far out, it's also seeing close up. It's seeing this moment and future moments, anticipating future moments and seeing this moment. You know, one of the things I hear a lot about is, which is kind of ironic with meditation, is live in the moment. It's not really that, right? I mean, that's chaos, right? To live in the moment. It's to be aware of the moment, but to live a broader perspective so that you can be here in this moment when you need to be in this moment, and you can be bigger when you need to be bigger. So looking at one of our metaphors of, say, walking towards the mountain, with the broader perspective, you see the mountains, you see what you're headed towards, but you're also keeping an eye on the path ahead of you. So if there's a hole on the path, you see clearly the hole needs to be stepped over. That's very present. That's this moment. So that broader perspective is part of what wisdom entails. Chaos, on the other hand, if you think of trying to do that kind of a journey in the dark, there would be no visibility. You wouldn't even really know which direction to go in. And furthermore, you wouldn't even see the pitfalls right in front of you. That's all you'd be dealing with. Can I just stay safe in this next moment? The uncertainty of how things are unfolding. So to try to live from that place of chaos, it's really hard for us to get much of a perspective on what are the things that we should be doing to live a life that brings us to freedom from stress and suffering. There's a thing that I was thinking about as I was putting this talk together that seems to be, it's a kind of a mechanism that we seem to have as part of our way that we operate. And I decided to call it the action mechanism. So if you can envision, for anything we do, what our system, our minds seem to do is if there's a perceived benefit, we want to go after that benefit. Our system does that, wants to go after the benefit. That's a very natural part of life. And if you think about that just as a mechanism that's not particularly intelligent, it's just there, it's agnostic. It's got no sense of morality or anything else. It's going to do whatever is in front of it to do. So if it perceives, if the perception is a benefit that's out further, like say something for the future, or for my well-being, or for the well-being of others that I'm looking at in the future, I can use that action mechanism in that way. But on the other hand, if I'm caught up in this chaotic world, that action mechanism is still going to work. It's just going to be very close at hand. So I'll find myself doing things that are not helpful to me, grabbing at whatever's close by. My greeds, my aversions, pushing things away, taking things at the expense of others, because it's the same mechanism. It's just our nature to do that. But the mechanism can be used in either of those two ways. So when we begin to look at that, we can begin to get a sense of how wisdom operates and how we can align ourselves with it. And the Buddha talked about this. He used the word skillful and unskillful as that way of aligning. So the idea that something we do or that we are skillful is to align ourselves so that we're using that mechanism for the bigger picture. We're aligning ourselves with the bigger picture. We're taking in what's out there and what's here, putting it together, and acting using that mechanism, allowing that to provide the motive force to allow us to move forward. And that's what the Buddha calls skillful. He says the roots of that skillful way of being, they're around connection and clear seeing. So generosity, compassion, and clear seeing. Understanding cause and effect. Cause and effect, we always kind of understand cause and effect, even if we're living in chaos, right? But the window is so small when we're living in chaos. It may be the next moment. It might be if somebody's addicted to drugs, for example, they're taking a drug for this current moment right now, not thinking about what's best for the long term. How many times do we live our lives that way? In a discussion or an argument or some kind of a thing or an encounter with another person, where we're caught up in our own world and our own desires, thrashing about in the water or operating in the fog or in the dark in the land in front of us, and not able to see at all that bigger picture. So in those cases, the roots of that unskillful way of being in the world are the opposite of the three that are the skillful roots. So it's operating from our own greed, letting that be the driving force, letting our aversion be the driving force, or letting our confusion be the driving force, just sort of thrashing around, not knowing. So that world of chaos is very small and closed, and so naturally it makes sense that this approach to how things happen, this machine that we operate by, is going to operate from those unskillful roots. And when we are able to see things more clearly, when we have the bigger picture, when we're able to take into account what's better for others, what's better for a longer term, we're able to have prudence. We're able to do things in a way that's reflective, more considerate, more attentive to the way things will go and align in the way that will bring us peace and freedom. So I think that, for me, looking at it that way is helpful to get a feeling for how do these pieces fit together, how does skillfulness fit together with wisdom. When we are in possession of wisdom, when we are wise or acting wisely, we will naturally come from those skillful roots. Why is that? Because we're seeing a bigger picture. It's actually kind of simple from that perspective. We're seeing much more of what's going on in the world around us. What we're feeling for our own greed, desire, and confusion inside gets small. On the other hand, when wisdom disappears and and chaos fills the space. It's the exact opposite. In chaos, we cannot take the big picture. If anything, the big picture seems almost like a caricature or a, just a painting or something that's got no reality to us when we're really caught up in this moment. So of course, these things that are left to drive us are our own wants, our own desires, and the fact that we can't see, that's the confusion. So I think looking at that from that perspective gives us a little bit of a way to begin to say, how does wisdom filter through and provide guidance to us for the rest of the Eightfold Path? Because it's like putting a light on all the rest of the Eightfold Path, clearing things out for us, so that when we come to any of the conditions, let's say of mind, let's start there. What do you spend your mind on? How do you spend your mind? When you're coming from greed or aversion or confusion, there's no foundation for how to spend your mind, and whatever comes along is how you're going to spend your mind. The Facebook, or used to be TV. I don't do Facebook, so I'm still in the TV world. But whatever it is that's coming into us, the news, the news that does no good for us to read it, but we absorb it as if it's critical for us to take it in. And look at the way we feel when we take it in like that. The gossiping and backbiting about other people. In the moment, there's some sort of reward that we get out of it because that action mechanism that is feeding off of that, that's a benefit, I'll grab it. That's a benefit, I'll grab it. But no awareness that what we're feeling in that moment as a benefit has no longevity to it. Has nothing other than that momentary satisfaction of instant gratification. So as we begin to look at that process that way, we can see how I spend my mind has to do with how much clarity or wisdom I have in the moment. And so the Buddha's prescription for that, first of all, of developing concentration practice, excuse me, so that we know what it feels like to be present. That's really what we're doing when we're practicing meditation at the concentration level. We're learning viscerally what's it feel like to be present. And then mindfulness is what am I paying attention to? Where am I putting my mental energy? Is there things that it could be better spent on than, reading the Yahoo News column or whatever it is that's online that's capturing our attention? Is there a better way for me to spend my mind? That bigger picture invites us to go there. And one of the beautiful things about this, what I was calling that action mechanism, this underlying motive power of it, it helps you go there. Think of things in your own life where you have wisdom about something. It looked like it was really going to be horrific to make changes in your life to accomplish that, but it almost takes care of itself. I have a process I've been doing for the last few years. Some of you might be familiar with the idea of a habit stack. You have one trigger habit and others fall out of it. And so I have this habit stack in the morning, and I get up at 5 a.m., and for the next 2 hours, my life literally just flows without any work on my side to try to decide, am I going to do my push-ups and sit-ups? Am I going to do my meditation? I have a thing I call a power hour where I can spend reading and doing a dharma and things like that. Am I going to do that? It's never a decision. There's no question. It just flows. And it comes from the part of life that's that active action mechanism that I was talking about just flows because I have to have created those things out of that one habit, this habit stack that came out of the one habit, just getting up at 5 a.m. We can do that with all kinds of parts of our lives. How you treat other people. There's one my wife Lori and I have been talking about, we're playing around with together. I think I've shared this in this group before. Years ago, I had a guy that I worked with, a customer, and he was up in the oil fields in Alaska, and I would talk to him on the phone, and he never mentioned a person in conversation without saying something nice about that person. Never. I don't ever recall him doing that. And I just know the way I felt when I talked to him. I just felt good. And I mean, if nothing else, you feel like, well, he probably says that stuff about me, when he's talking about me. But aside from that, just that, no matter, we were talking about business, but he would always have something nice to say about anybody he brought up in conversation. And so Lori and I have talked about, wouldn't that be nice? And so we've been playing around with doing that together, just to recall when we think of somebody, something nice about that person. That's another one of these little pieces of wisdom that we can see from that big picture, that I can use this to cultivate how I spend my mind, and in that case, my speech. So in addition to what we do with our mind, we can use this path of wisdom to cultivate what we do with our speech and our action as well. And just like that habit stack where these things just fall out, when we cultivate skillful speech, it will just fall out. You will find you don't have to watch every moment that you're not saying something harsh or mean or foul. You won't have to do it because your mind and your tongue will just naturally roll skillfully. And so we can train ourselves to be skillful in our mind and in our speech, which is really just the way the Buddha talked about, is aligning with these different folds of the Eightfold Path. And it all comes from washing these qualities of life with wisdom, bringing wisdom to all of us. So that's all good and well, but we don't have it all the time. You can hear talk, you can read a book, but then you go home, you go back to life, and wisdom doesn't seem to be present. So how do we work with it? Well, the good news is I think we all have some wisdom. No matter how bad you feel, you have some wisdom. So those are the places we start. I think by working with something like the Eightfold Path on a regular basis in your life, and cultivating trainings, cultivating these kind of habit stacks through the wisdom that you possess, you actually feed the wisdom. It's a cycle. So if you start speaking skillfully, you cultivate more wisdom, which cultivates more skillful speech, which cultivates more wisdom. So this cycle feeds itself if you're able to do that. So you can take the smallest thing and begin to create habits out of those things. One in my own life that I've been doing for many years, and I feel it's had a powerful effect on me, is saying these precepts that we did at the beginning. I say the precepts several times a day. I use them sometimes as my default go-to when I don't need my mind for something. Most of the time I don't need my mind. Sometimes I do. When I'm trying to figure something out, when I'm working in conversation, I need my mind for that, and so I'll use my mind. But there's so many hours of the day that I don't really need my mind. It's going to do something. It's going to do something. And I was reading something not too long ago about when the mind is idle like that, because of our history as entities, that the tendency is to get negative, because it tends to be more safe for us to be concerned with what's on the horizon. Even sitting here in Shaker Heights, Ohio, the mind still works that way. So letting your mind run free without any regulatory focus at all is to invite to move from the big broad picture to the chaos. So you're allowing your mind to do that. I'm not saying this in a judgmental way. It's a natural flow. It's just what the mind will do. But we have the capacity to stop that by taking just a little snippet of wisdom that says, I want more than that out of my mind. I want my mind to be more than that. Just that little thing there is wisdom. And then I can bring that in from time to time and say, maybe I was checking my email and I got caught up in some news stuff, and I'm into it 15 or 20 minutes before I realize I'm feeling, stressed about it, and it's not what I really want. And then you can just say, is this what I want for my mind? Is this how I want my mind to be spent? It's a resource, friends. Our mind is a resource like your time or your money. It's the same thing. You have so much of it, and that's it. How do you choose to spend it? So having these little nuggets of wisdom that you can bring back to recall, and then have, like, if you do something like the precepts, you can spell out, like for me, I spelled out what right speech means to me, and how to avoid, like, telling things that are not true, avoiding exaggeration, no gossiping or backbiting, avoiding idle chatter, and cultivating a kindly tongue. So those are just little triggers that help me. And by doing this over the years, there are times when I will be in a conversation and they will just pop up to me while I'm talking. And often I will change what I'm saying or how I'm saying it. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes the stuff still spews, but often I will. So this training process can go on with that. It can go on with our actions, the same way we do with our speech, right action, little nuggets. How do I choose to spend my time? What do I choose to do with my time? How will I interact with the people around me? How will I interact with people if I'm in a coffee shop with the person who's waiting on me? Can I take the time to really be present to that person, just to make contact with them? And again, the more we do this, each time we do this, we are cultivating the understanding and the intentionality that constitute wisdom in this Buddhist path. So we're building that into our process by doing these other parts of the Eightfold Path. It feeds the wisdom, which in turn gives us more energy to feed this other part of the path. And I'm amazed in my own life, not that it's perfect all the time or anything, but I'm just amazed when I work on something like that. It's not the huge mountain to climb that I thought it was going to be, because the work is done by this tool, or this technique of the mind, this action mechanism I was talking about. It'll do all the work. I just have to give it the right perspective to work from. I have to let it know what's the real benefit. What are the places that I want you to mind? Where do I want you to focus for benefits? Well, I want it to be in connection with others. I want it to be in clear seeing the things that I do now and where they might lead. That's where I want that work to be done. Not in the greed of the moment, not in the aversion of the moment, not in the confusion when I'm flustered and not sure what to do. So by using this model or something like this for yourself, and using the Eightfold Path in this way, like the Buddha said, this is the path to freedom. This is the path to freedom. That's what he gave us. And it's there for us to make use of in a way that works for us. So I just encourage you to think about taking the pieces of wisdom that you have in your life and putting them to really practical use on a daily basis with these different steps, different folds of the path, in whatever way works for you. And then the last part of it is to reflect on that from time to time. When you do this process, go back and think and reflect on, how was that? How did I feel when I spoke skillfully in a conversation that could have gone in the other direction? How do I feel? What do I take from the other person who I'm talking with, how they might be feeling? Because that reflection really reinforces this process. It's like we're reliving it for a moment. So I did it, and now almost as a spectator, I'm able to relive it and see the real marrow of that skillfulness right in that situation. So this idea of, in our skillful moments of reflecting my speech, my action, when I actually put the phone down and stop reading the news article that's causing me stress, how do I feel when I put that down? If I actually turn my phone off, how do I feel? Those little moments like that of seeing how that works, that becomes the next moment of wisdom. That's your wisdom stream, if you will, that's taking over the space, and there's not room for chaos when there's this clarity that comes with wisdom. So I think that's all I have. Maybe take a couple of minutes if there's any questions that come up around that. I know that was a lot.
going to jump right in. Thank you. That was very powerful and helpful. The reason I want to jump in is to plug the book club that we've got on the second Wednesday of the month. It's on the website. We're doing a book by Dale Stark in conversation with Joseph Goldstein called
Creating a Life of Integrity.
Creating a Life of Integrity. And they one paramita a month, parami a month, is the goal. And the first one is generosity. And it's what you're describing here. I was wondering, how does this fit in the paramitas in with the Buddha message? And it's clearly comes out of wisdom, that being generous, dana, is wise.
Yes.
You know, it gets away from self-centeredness into other-centeredness, one-centeredness. So thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Dave. That's a good point, because something like generosity in the form of dana or other forms of generosity, there's two aspects to it, right? One is a practice. If you don't got it, you can practice it. You can practice being generous with others, even if you're not feeling generous in the moment. You can go through the motions of it, and going through that motion creates wisdom, and that wisdom creates the energy to become generous, to become generosity. You become that. And when you become that, the work that it took when you were practicing it is not there, because you are it. Think about honesty for a minute. Think about your honesty. Are you honest? It's not that it's an adjective. We think of it as an adjective. It's not. It's who you are. You are honest. How hard do you have to work at being honest? I mean, oh gosh, there's all these people, a lot of wallets in here, but I'm not going to take anything, right? The Donna box, there's no lock. I'm not going to take it, right? We're not doing that. You are honest. When you are what you're talking about, you don't even think about it. So generosity will act that way as well. As you develop the wisdom by going through the process, you become that generosity that you seek. And you don't even have to think about it. You know, it's not a question about it anymore. So thank you.
You mentioned this friend or this client you had who always had the habit of saying something positive about everybody he mentioned. In therapy, the therapist said that we were trying to create a safe space where it was okay to say whatever was on your mind. It struck me as you were saying that that's what this guy was creating.
Yeah, right.
He was creating a safe space. What a great place to spend time.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And you felt safe.
Right, yeah, thank you, Jeff. That's exactly it, right? Without ever saying anything, in a work environment,
Yeah,
right? Old white males, right? In that environment, this guy found a way to create this safe space, and we felt it. Thank you, yeah.
It's my experience is your experience, that even if I'm not feeling generous, I can go through the motions, and it calls generosity. It calls the feeling of generosity forward. But it's counterintuitive in a way, because we're taught that, like, if you're just going through the motions, you're not being genuine. You're just pretending. So could you say something about that part?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, there's a truth to it, but we need to let it go. It's like training wheels. Going through the motions is like training wheels. You do it till you get the feel of the bicycle, and then you take the training wheels off. So the same is true with something like cultivating anything, cultivating a skillful mind, skillful speech, skillful anything, cultivating that. We have these training wheels, which is to go through the motion. During that process of going through the motion, the only thing we concentrate on is the thing that we're paying attention to, the generosity of just doing that. I'm not going to pay attention to Am I genuine? I know I'm not genuine at this point. I'm not going to pay attention. Will I ever be? I don't need my mind to clutter the situation at all. And that's all that can happen with the mind saying, you know, this is disingenuous, or you'll never get it, or don't. It's just the mind cluttering the situation. So I'm in the process. I'm training myself to be who I want to be, and so I will take these steps to do it. Same way as if you put on training wheels on your bicycle, and you're 6 years old, other kids are going to laugh at you because you get training wheels. You still put the training wheels on until you don't need them. So I would say that's probably the way to think of how you cultivate this. You're training yourself, so it's not really got to do with how genuine it is yet. The genuineness of it will come automatically, and you probably feel that when you begin to feel gratitude or generosity. When you begin to feel that, the question of genuineness disappears. It can't exist when you are that. It can't be there. Like think of the honesty that we talked about a minute ago. Are you disingenuous when you're not taking things that don't belong to you? What a story, huh? For the mind. That'd take a lot of work to put that together. Some of us could do it. But it's no value to us. We are honest. We are that. We are generous. And so to arrive at that spot, we go through the movement of practice. Does that help?
Yeah.
I'd like to say something if I could. I think about these good, wholesome activities from the opposite side. Why does generosity work? Well, I can prove that it works because to be stingy in one's life, not to give love, not to give vulnerability, creates an illness. The opposite is what we're talking about here. To be generous, to give, creates a healthiness. So I think of it by looking at the opposite, proving the theory that generosity is good.
Yeah. Thanks, Paul. That's what the Buddha said, right? Because the Buddha, he said there's these skillful roots, and the unskillful ones are just the opposites. So many places in the suttas, the Buddha will have, don't do this, do this, and they're just the opposites of each other, and they support each other. So thank you. Yeah.
I think compassion and charity are a huge part of the generosity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they kind of come together. It's pretty hard to have one of those without having all of them, isn't it? I mean, if you think of what's really happening there, at least in the Buddhist sense of the word, our sense of me as a separate self or entity is softening. I'm feeling connection. Doesn't mean there's no me here. I'm still here. But who I took myself to be is no longer who I take myself to be when I feel that connection. So the idea of generosity, of sharing, is more natural when this is me. Because I certainly can share with myself, right? Nobody has problems sharing with themselves, right? That's what greed's all about, right? So to begin to see this me as expanding outward, that sense of sharing is a natural flow of that process. And the same care that we have for ourselves, however it manifests, when we begin to open up, that care flows out, and that's compassion. When it's directed here, it can be as healthy as self-care, and and very unhealthy. There's very unhealthy forms for it when it's directed inward. But when that sense of self begins to soften, and we find that sense of connection with others, that flow naturally begins to come out, and compassion happens. So it'd be pretty hard to be generous and not have any compassion, because it's how we see the world invites both of those.
This topic or your discussion brought up many questions. I don't know if they're, or just, Thich Nhat Hanh speaks to heaven having suffering. It's basically we always have the opposites of these things. I'm gonna butcher that, but that's what I've heard from Plum Village, and I'm like, oh man, how do you chaos and wisdom being hand in hand? You know, I guess like the fog's gonna roll in that example you give us, or you were using for me when I was thinking about it more. It was like, Trump's gonna roll in, he's figuring out how to roll in. I can laugh at the boogeyman, or I can accept the I'm just like, me navigating my own wisdom amidst the fact that chaos exists.
Mm-hmm.
Within, without.
Yeah.
The Beatles had it all. I don't.
Yeah.
But you know, I'm just.
Well, it's a very powerful quandary that you're bringing up, Quinn. I think the secret to it is that it's to learn that it's all happening in here. That's not to say there's not real stuff in the world. Please don't take it that way. There is real stuff in the world. I'm not saying there isn't. But it's our relationship to that stuff in the world which is what causes our suffering, not the stuff in the world. As terrible as some of the things in the world are, it's our relationship to those things that causes suffering. Watch a cat catch a bird, and you feel the sadness. Or I saw a hawk catch a chipmunk. Two chipmunks were running around, and he caught one of them, and some part of me felt really bad about that. The hawk didn't feel bad. What's the reality of that situation? There is just a bird and a chipmunk. And then there's a bird and two chipmunks, and there's a bird and one chipmunk. That's the situation. For the hawk, it's a very different situation than the other chipmunk who's still looking for the first one, or the guy who got eaten, or me as the bystander. So what that tells us is that there's some flexibility in how we meet what's going on in the world. And the tools that we have from this kind of a path around wisdom, around compassion, around generosity, around clear seeing, if we work from that base and then begin to ask, how do I meet the world from that space, instead of from the space of fear, the space of aversion and confusion? How do I meet from that space? And we're in a better position to help the world when we're meeting it from that space than when we meet it from the confusion. I've got a new Sangha member that went run across the floor.
Many ways.
Yes. Yeah. All right, friends. Well,
A new Sangha member.
yeah. All right. Well, the Buddha talked about in the Metta Sutta, those with many legs. So we have one tonight. All right. Well, I sort of used the last meditation time, but thank you all for being here.